Forget everything you think you know about rebelling.
Yeah. Chuck any image of teenagers shouting at their parents.
Today we're going deeper.
Way
We're
deeper.
diving into the psychology of rebellion itself.
With Albert Camus as our guide.
His book, The Rebel, is like a map.
To the core of what makes us human.
This urge to say no to the world,
To say no to, like, the way things are.
to the powers that be.
To even existence itself sometimes.
We're going to trace this urge
From the ancient Greeks.
to the revolutionaries of our time.
And yeah, we'll even touch on.
What's the deal with those guys like the Marquis de Sade?
Oh yeah, he's in there too.
You know, the ones who took rebellion to a whole other level?
Buckle up.
It's going to be a wild ride.
So the ancient Greeks.
They're like the OG rebels.
Yes,
Right?
kind of, but their rebellion was totally different.
From how we see it today.
They saw themselves as part of this, like...
Cosmic order.
Exactly, so rebelling against a god.
Wasn't about destroying everything.
It was more like,
Wanting a promotion
yeah, you wanted a better position.
in the cosmic hierarchy.
Not to, like, overthrow the whole system.
But then things take a dark turn, right?
With Cain and Abel.
That's where rebellion gets.
Real
It becomes about
negation.
the authority figure entirely.
No more promotions.
This pure.
Destruction.
So that sets the stage
The
for
rebels who came after.
the Marquis de Sade.
Oh boy, here we go.
This guy was something else.
He looked at nature and he saw,
Pure cruelty.
and so he was like,
If the universe is messed up.
I'm gonna live by my own rules,
Exactly. He
Oh.
embraced absolute freedom.
even if it meant
Well,
doing some pretty messed up stuff.
he really challenged the idea.
That there are any.
Universal moral laws.
Which brings us to Nietzsche, the God is dead guy.
Right, but Camus actually argues.
That Nietzsche didn't kill God.
He just acknowledged that.
God was already dead.
Like society had already abandoned.
The idea of a higher power. So what happens when people stop believing?
That's where things get really...
Existential.
We're talking nihilism.
The belief that life is.
Meaningless.
And this is where it gets interesting.
Because if nothing matters...
That's the point of rebelling.
Great question.
Nietzsche's answer.
We create our own meaning.
He believed in the power of
The individual.
to forge their own
Values and morals. But not everyone was on board with
that whole.
DIY approach to existence.
Some philosophers saw nihilism as
The dangerous worldview.
like without a sense of meaning,
We're lost.
adrift.
But Camus doesn't stop there.
He also looks at rebellion,
On a grand scale,
evolutions
the French Revolution is a perfect example.
of how the quest for freedom,
Can go terribly wrong. It started with these great ideals.
but it descended into violence.
And terror.
This is where the social contract comes in,
That agreement we all make.
to live together peacefully.
But Camus points out that it can become,
A new form of tyranny,
especially when it's based on
the so-called,
will of the people,
because then anyone who disagrees
becomes
is the enemy.
so you end up justifying
All sorts of oppression.
in the name of freedom.
It's a paradox.
But then things take another turn.
With German philosophy,
Hegel enters the scene
with his mind-blowing idea,
that human nature isn't fixed.
it's evolving,
He saw history as this
unfolding.
of the human spirit,
And revolution wasn't just about changing.
the political order.
It was about changing ourselves.
And these ideas had a huge impact on
Karl Marx.
the class struggle guy.
He believed the working class would
Eventually overthrow the system,
and create a classless society.
free from oppression,
And he saw this revolution as a necessary step.
in the evolution of human consciousness.
An idea he got straight from Hegel
So we've gone from the ancient Greeks.
to Marx.
It's a lot to take in.
But Camus doesn't just look at the history of rebellion,
He's also interested in
the psychology of it,
what drives us to rebel
what we hope to achieve.
and what dangers we face along the way
And that's what we'll be exploring.
in the rest of this deep dive.
So stay tuned. So we've talked about the Greeks and Cain and Nietzsche and Marx, but where does Camus himself actually stand on all this?
Yeah, what's his big takeaway from all this rebellion?
Well, one of the things that really fascinated him was this idea of state terrorism.
State terrorism.
It's kind of a chilling concept, right?
It sounds scary.
It is. It's basically when a government uses violence and fear to control its own people.
So it's not just about like silencing critics.
Yo, it goes way beyond that. It's about creating an atmosphere where people are too afraid to even think about rebelling.
So the government becomes like the ultimate bully.
Exactly. They use their power to crush any form of dissent.
And Camus argues that this can actually be a consequence of some revolutionary ideas.
Yeah, it's kind of a twister irony, isn't it?
It's like revolutions are supposed to be about freedom.
But they can end up creating these oppressive regimes.
So how does that happen?
Well, a lot of revolutions start with this utopian vision, right?
Like a perfect society.
Exactly. They want to create a world without injustice or inequality or suffering.
But that desire for absolute purity can become dangerous.
Because once you decide what good is, anyone who doesn't fit into that mold becomes the enemy.
And then you start justifying all sorts of horrible things in the name of achieving that perfect society.
Camus saw this happen again and again throughout history.
From the French Revolution to the totalitarian regimes of the 20th century. It's kind of a bleak outlook.
It is, but Camus isn't completely pessimistic.
He offers some hope, right?
He does. He points towards something he calls rebellion without dogma.
Rebellion without dogma.
It's about rejecting any fixed ideology or absolute truth.
So it's a constant state of questioning.
Exactly. You're always open to new perspectives and you're willing to challenge your own beliefs.
So it's not about blindly following a leader or subscribing to a rigid ideology.
No, it's about a personal commitment to fighting injustice and oppression.
But also being open to different approaches.
Exactly. And Camus believed that this kind of rebellion is rooted in a deep love for life, for the human spirit.
It's about saying no to oppression.
But also saying yes to something more.
But how does this rebellion without dogma actually play out in the real world?
Well, that's where things get really interesting, because Camus believed that art, and especially literature, could play a crucial role.
Art as rebellion.
That's right, and we'll dive into that more next time.
Okay, so art can be a form of rebellion.
That's what Camus believed.
But how does that actually work?
Well, he saw art as this powerful way to challenge the status quo.
Without resorting to violence or dogma.
Right, like a novel isn't going to overthrow a dictator.
True, but...
It can plant these seeds of doubt
Oh, I see.
and spark critical thinking.
Make people question things.
Exactly.
And imagine different possibilities.
When you read a novel, you're entering a different world.
Created by the author.
You're seeing things from new perspectives.
Experiencing different values, different ways of being.
And that can be incredibly powerful.
So it's like a mental vacation.
That can actually change how you see the real world.
Exactly.
And for Camus, that's where the rebellion lies.
It's about refusing to accept the limitations of reality.
Pushing those boundaries.
Exploring new horizons of thought and experience. That makes sense for novels, but what about other forms of art?
Like painting or music or film.
Can those be rebellious too?
Absolutely. Any art form that challenges conventions.
Provokes thought.
Expands our understanding of what it means to be human.
That can be a form of rebellion.
Think about a painting that breaks all the rules of perspective.
Or a piece of music that uses dissonance to create unease.
These works are rebelling against the traditional ways of seeing and hearing the world.
So it's not just about the content of the art.
It's also about the form and the style.
So a painting that perfectly captures a bowl of fruit.
Might be technically skilled.
But it's not necessarily rebellious.
Because it's not challenging our perceptions.
It's not making us question anything.
Camus was more interested in art that shakes things up.
That disrupts our complacency.
Forces us to look at the world with fresh eyes.
This makes me think about all the artists and writers who have been censored or persecuted throughout history.
Their work was seen as a threat.
Because it challenged the powers that be.
Exactly. And that's why Camus believed that true artists
Are always rebels at heart.
they're not afraid to speak truth to power.
To challenge convention.
And imagine a world that's different from the one we live in.
This is a really inspiring way to think about art.
It's not just about entertainment or aesthetics.
It's about engaging with the world in a meaningful way.
And that's ultimately what Camus was getting at in The Rebel.
He wanted us to embrace our capacity for rebellion.
Not as a destructive force,
But as a creative one.
a force that can help us build a more just compassionate and meaningful world.
So what are we waiting for?
Go out there and be a rebel.
Question everything, challenge the status quo.
And never stop imagining a world that's more just and humane.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into The Rebel.